to, backtrack a little bit in the conversation, Stacy, you talked about the disproportionate impact that COVID-19 has had, both from a health and economic perspective on communities of color. I mentioned earlier in our conversation that between February and April, the number of business owners declined in the United States by 3.3 million. That same study said that the loss during that period in terms of Black business owners was 41%, which is, I think, just a staggering number to think about. And we know from numerous indicators about the gaps, the discrepancies between Black entrepreneurs and white entrepreneurs, for example. And I'll just share one that I thought was particularly interesting. And this is prior to COVID. The stat was that white entrepreneurs were more than 1.5 times more likely than Black entrepreneurs to have business receipts of $1 million or more. But on the other end of the spectrum, Black entrepreneurs were more than twice as likely than white entrepreneurs to own a business with less than $50,000 in receipts. So let's talk about this issue and what you guys are seeing, Brandy and Stacy, in your work, particularly when it comes to Black entrepreneurs or other entrepreneurs of color, the challenges that they are facing, and what are some of the policy responses that perhaps would be particularly targeted at helping create a more level playing field for these entrepreneurs.
Most recent data that we got, I think from Census Bureau data from 2012 regarding sort of the breakdown on demographics on firm ownership is that of rural firms, particularly are focused on rural, right, with paid employees, in North Carolina, 16% were female owned, 79% were white owned, 8% were owned by people of color, and then another 14% were listed as non-classified per race ethnicity classification, right? And so the data speaks for itself when regards to sort of who's able and who's in the market in the sense of business ownership. And to that end, what are the then sort of support networks in place to, one, I think let people know this is a viable opportunity to take advantage of. Just thinking back when I was in school, who knew that starting a business was something that was a viable option? It wasn't anything I had thought about. I had been told my entire life, go to school, go to college, get a good job, get some good insurance, get some retirement benefits, and pay your house off. And so not having the conversation about what it means to be able to take a risk, right? Therefore, there was a lack of willingness to do just that. And so I think it really is about how do we start earlier, right? And engaging our young people to inform them this is a viable option. How do we support them in taking that path in the way that's going to lead to success? I think particularly for communities of color and people of color, it really is about seeing someone like yourself doing the work to know it really is a viable option and opportunity. And so I think without that, it really leads to the likelihood of fewer people engaging and having that same opportunity.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I know that there has been research that shows exposure to entrepreneurship increases the odds that someone will become an entrepreneur themselves. And particularly when you see someone that looks like you, that's from your own community, have success in something like that, can be really powerful in leading a younger person to choose that path of entrepreneurship themselves. Stacy, thoughts on policies that may be particularly helpful, that are targeted at helping entrepreneurs of color gain greater access and have greater levels of success?
Yeah, I think the capital issue is huge, that Brandy talked about earlier in the conversation. We have seen this huge loss in community banks. We've lost nationally about 1 out of every 3 community banks over the last decade. And there are now quite a large number of counties that lack community banks altogether. And our data shows that that's disproportionately counties that have a higher African American or a higher Latino population. And so our financial infrastructure for meeting the needs of entrepreneurs in general is weak, and it's especially weak for entrepreneurs of color. But it's also, it's even broader than that, because of course, a lot of entrepreneurs start their businesses based on their personal savings and their assets in terms of their home. There is a whole set of strategies that I think we need to be thinking about that have to do with the banking sector, that have to do with capital, and how you begin to build a kind of a sort of cycle of wealth building, where we get stronger banks in these communities that are able to do more lending, that build up businesses that are able to generate better jobs and higher incomes that enable people to buy homes, and so on. There's a kind of cycle there that white neighborhoods have been much more able, have been granted the privilege of being able to take advantage of, that's often been denied to communities of color. I think Brandy's notion about, I love this idea of like, why don't we introduce students to the idea of business ownership, which we just don't. And it is a much, in many respects, a better job opportunity than I think you see kids coming out of college with a lot of debt and maybe getting a low wage job. And at the same time, communities that need services, grocery stores, pharmacies that they don't have. And it seems there's just an incredible opportunity to marry those two problems in a really great solution. And part of that is capital, but then also how do we think about our economic development incentive programs and our entrepreneurship programs, and the ways in which right now they may be structured for a certain kind of entrepreneur. And if we really assessed them and reoriented them, we could use them to actually bring in a new generation of entrepreneurs that help to close the racial wealth gap, and build businesses in communities of color. Mm-hmm. And I think that's another area where there's really a lot of ripe opportunity for that kind of work.
I believe that the data is that the median wealth for a white family in the United States is 9 to 10 times greater than that for a Black family. I think about that in the context of the fourth pillar of America's New Business Plan, which is support. And how do we create a more robust safety net that enables entrepreneurial risk-taking? Personal or family wealth is a safety net for folks, right? It guards against the risk of failure if you start your own business. It also could be that working capital you need to get started in the first place. But if you're coming from a place where you already have so little wealth, you don't have that safety net, you don't have those relationships that might help fund the start of your business. So I think the wealth piece is really critical.